The government revoked the registration for this car at the beginning of July last year, and I've now gotten a reply stating that due to a massive workload, we estimate another 7 to 8 months to be able to give you a final reply whether or not your chassis replacement is legal or if the car is deemed unfit for traffic. And that means in September I will get a yes or a no on whether or not this car will be able to be re-registered, or if it's impossible to register in Norway forever. And now I'll give you a quick timeline just to paint the picture. This is built in 1974, and in 2008 this was exported from the UK to Norway. It was then taxed into the country, inspected and approved by the Norwegian Public Road Administration, and it got a Norwegian registration. And following that, this car changed hands a handful of times until I bought the car in 2023. But all throughout that period, the mileage of the car only increased by a few thousand miles, so I thought that since it was only a few thousand miles since the government inspected the car, it shouldn't be any big surprises. I then tore the car apart and started to restore all the separate parts individually before I eventually made my way to the chassis. And it turns out sometime between 1974 and 2008, someone in the UK made a really shitty restoration job of the original chassis, and I was now in a pickle. Because as I mentioned, I was restoring all of the parts separately, but when I made my way to the chassis, it was so heavily corroded and poorly repaired that if I jumped on the middle, it would probably snap. So every welder I asked declined to even touch the thing. And following that, I was advised to get a replacement chassis with COC documentation, which I also taxed into the country, so everything was above the board. And here's the pickle, that I've now been informed by the government after doing the restoration that if I want to replace the chassis, that's perfectly fine, but I need to ask in advance 7 to 8 months before I even touched the car. If it's taken apart, it's too late. But during the build, I was also told off the record that in theory, I could just merge them together and that would count as a repair. But given the state of the chassis, I didn't want to have a dangerous but legal car. And during the restoration, I followed every single piece of guidelines on the official government website, stating that if you replace the chassis, you're not allowed to change the axles, the gearbox, the engine, and so on. And then fast forward to June last year, someone watching this restoration online reported it to the Norwegian government that I had an illegal chassis replacement and also built the car from scratch out of a bunch of different parts. So it was no longer the same car as stated in the registration, which is not true. And this accusation was made by a private person, but remember that. I then booked a full inspection of the car at a traffic station at the 1st of July. I explained the whole situation, and he went over the car and I showed proof of the identity of the car and asked, what am I supposed to do now? And he said, I don't know. He then proceeded to say that the Norwegian Public Road Administration is going on a summer holiday for almost 2 months, so I were advised to book another appointment at the end of August. And I did that. But before I left, I asked, are you legally allowed to tell me who reported the car? Because keep your enemies close and all that. And he said, it is reported as a private person, but the guy does work for the Norwegian Public Road Administration. Interesting. I then carry on towards the North Cape, which was the goal for the first test drive of the car. I booked another appointment at a traffic station up there. But during the summer, I asked someone working there, do you think you can help me with this? And they said, no, we think you should book an appointment all the way down south in the country. So I did that. I then drive more than 2,000 kilometers further south for a different inspection at a different traffic station. And throughout this inspection, I show proof of the identity of the car and everything else I have filmed and photographed throughout the restoration. He says, I'm not sure what to do, but he actually asked someone further up the chain. And after some back and forth for an hour, I was then advised to file a normal chassis replacement application as I would have done from the get-go, and I would get a reply back in maybe 6 months. And then fast forward to October, I was notified I could pay 200 euros for a full day inspection of the car with 2 traffic consultants from the Public Road Administration and a third guy over the phone. I said, sure, let's go. But of course, they didn't have anything available until November, so I booked the first one I could and waited another 4 weeks. However, the night before this appointment, they sent me an email saying, oh, we didn't see your reply, so we are not ready for tomorrow. And after I told them off, they said, okay, we can do it tomorrow. I have filmed and photographed every single piece of this car getting dismantled, restored, and put back on the car. But their email system does not allow me to send more than maybe 4 pictures at a time. And I was also strictly forbidden to give them a flash drive So I had to print out several hundred pictures of me restoring the car and hand it over to them at this final inspection. So I showed up to this appointment at 8:30 in the morning, and they interrogated me and inspected the car until maybe 12 o'clock. And then they disappeared for an hour because they needed to have lunch. But they had the car at the traffic station until maybe 3 o'clock. And throughout that entire day, that traffic station only worked on my car plus one other guy getting a horse trailer registered. Which makes it kind of hilarious that they're now stating that due to a massive workload, they can't give me a reply on my application until 8 months from now. I, however, managed to get back to them with all of the documentation they had requested 1 hour after the inspection. A couple of weeks later, they get back to me saying we need this. I got back to them a couple of minutes later. And then I didn't hear anything back from them until the end of December. I said, what's going on? They said, we are looking for this. I said, well, ask me. And then I sent it right away. And then they replied, of course, we are not getting back to you in a while because we are now going on another holiday. We'll get back to you next year. I then patiently waited another 5 weeks or so before they got back to me yesterday with an email stating they need another 8 months to give me a final reply. That is in September. That is 15 months from the first inspection until a yes or no answer. And of course, I take full blame. It's my fault for not doing the paperwork in the correct order. But if the guy at the first traffic station said, file this paperwork, I would have been done by now. Thus far, I've dealt with 7 different guys working for the Norwegian Public Road Administration, and everyone has said this is not dangerous, this is more safe now than when it left the factory. This car is also more than 50 years old. It's fully exempt from all inspections and emission tests for the rest of its life. And also, during my last visit at the traffic station, I asked the major inspector, what if I registered this as a new car? He said that is perfectly doable, but it needs to comply with every single safety and emission regulation from 2026. And the registration fee, or tax if you may, is at least 10,000 euros. So all in all, I'm deemed a criminal for restoring the car. The car is deemed unfit for traffic because it's restored. And the computer says no.